Marie, I wanted to turn to you next and kind of picking up on this point around democratizing data. You've done a lot of work looking at subgroups in the American Community Survey, and Census is launching a new initiative using the theory of differential privacy to add more privacy protections to these data. Could you talk a little bit about what those privacy protections look like and how this effort will impact the work of researchers like yourself?
All right, thank you very much, Rakeen, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being here. And I also want to thank Austin Clemens and the organizers of this fantastic event. I could not be more delighted or excited when I got the invitation, so thank you. These are extremely important issues, very timely issues, and they are very near and dear to my heart. You're right, Rakeen, a lot of my research over the years, in fact, going back to when I was a graduate student in the early to mid 90s, I've been looking a lot in terms of Hispanic socioeconomic outcomes, including entrepreneurship. But taking into account that, as Randy mentioned, when we think about the Hispanic or Latino population, it's actually quite heterogeneous. And sometimes when we hear reports, and we see this a lot with some of the reports that would come out based on federal data, we just hear about the Hispanic population or what's happening with Hispanic employment or unemployment. Without understanding that there are key differences within the Hispanic population. We have differences in terms of our sub-ethnic groups. So Mexican Americans are the largest group of approximately 60%. So when we hear about reports of Hispanic economic outcomes, we're really, a lot of times that's being driven by what's happening with Mexican Americans. But Puerto Ricans are the second largest group, Cubans, Salvadorans, Dominicans. We have a lot of different groups that comprise the Hispanic population. And then depending on where you live, we have different geographic areas. In some areas, for example, on the Eastern Seaboard, we have Puerto Ricans who are the largest group. And then in Florida, we have Cubans who are the largest Hispanic group. Although outside of the Miami metropolitan area, we're also looking at Puerto Ricans being the largest. So if we're only looking at the national aggregated data, we may be missing information on what's happening with the subgroups. We heard earlier with both Rhonda and Tracy talking about the importance of gender. So the experience of Latinas during COVID, looking at all the labor market outcomes or what was readily available to us, Latinas were disproportionately hit relative to Latinos, and including not just with unemployment, but also their labor force participation rates were affected. Differences in immigration matter as well. And so in the Hispanic population, you range from people who just recently arrived from another country versus a lot of groups, a lot of people have been living in what is now the US. Their families go back to areas that were not part of the US when the US was formed. So that includes the island of Puerto Rico, with our San Juan being the oldest continuously operated capital in what is now the United States. It was 1521. And so when we think about American Community Survey, it's my favorite data set. I love it. I love it because it is a very large data set. So you can do a lot in terms of disaggregation when focusing or looking at Hispanic groups.